Welcome to the MamasteFit Podcast. On this episode, Faith is here to share her birth story, but not just her birth story where she had her baby at home, but also her conception was a little bit different with using a known donor sperm, as well as her postpartum journey struggling with mastitis, as well as a prolapse diagnosis.
Welcome to the MamasteFit Podcast. This is Gina, perinatal fitness trainer and birth doula.
And I'm Roxanne, labor and delivery nurse and student midwife.
And this is the MamasteFit Podcast, where we empower you on your prenatal fitness, birth, and postpartum return to fitness journey.
Our podcast shares how to move throughout your pregnancy to stay strong and comfortable, because pain is not a requirement of pregnancy. Understand the science of birth and how to approach recovery after birth.
We share our personal experience as mothers navigating this stage in our lives, plus our professional expertise as birth workers and fitness professionals.
Our goal is to help you feel confident as you navigate the perinatal timeframe for an empowering pregnancy, positive birth, and postpartum journey.
We are glad to have you with us on this journey and that you have chosen us to support you.
Welcome to the MamasteFit Podcast. On this episode, we have Faith here to share her birth story and her preconception journey. Thank you so much for being here, Faith.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course, we're so excited to hear. So let's just kind of jump right in, start from the beginning of how did you start wanting to become pregnant, and how was that entire kind of journey for you?
Well, we had kind of an interesting conception story. My partner has a genetic disorder. He's a carrier for something called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, which is a genetic lung-liver condition. So when we were first talking about having kids, he just immediately was like, well, I'm not sure if I want to have genetic kids because his mother and a cousin actually both died in their 30s.
Oh, no.
Of complications related to the alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. So, he was already on the fence about having genetic kids. And then we got me tested just to make sure that I didn't happen to be a carrier. And of course, I was a carrier,
Yeah, of course.
So at that point, we decided that we wanted to move forward with having kids. We were both still really excited about the idea of being parents, but we decided to use a sperm donor so that we could sort of, not have a kid with a incurable genetic disorder.
Yeah.
So when we first started off with wanting to, use a sperm donor, we started off kind of going more traditional route where we were talking to a sperm bank up in Seattle. And we were just going to, do frozen donor sperm. And the way that works there is that you essentially the kid can reach out and try to contact the donor when they're 18. But you really don't know that much before then. Before then, it's you have a little donor bio, about what their favorite color is, but you don't really know that much about them. So we did 3 attempts with frozen sperm and I didn't get pregnant. And during that process, we were also reading a little bit more about the experience of donor-conceived adults. And one thing that was really consistent was people wanted to have the opportunity to get to know their donor and get to know, their genetic family from a younger age rather than having to discover that when they were a teenager or in their early 20s. So we moved down to California at the end or in June of 2022. And we decided at that point that we were going to move towards trying to find a known donor because the laws in California are much better at protecting people who kind of use donors outside of the formal fertility clinic world.
Yeah.
In California, you basically just need a basic little one page, you're a donor, that's the expectation of the relationship. So after we moved down, I actually posted on my social media, which was honestly the scariest thing I've ever posted on social media. But I talked about our experiences and why we were looking for someone who was willing to, both donate sperm to us and also have an ongoing relationship where we could spend some holidays together and be a real person, a extended family for this baby. And a old friend of mine reached out and said that they were interested. And this was actually someone where I knew their partner better than them. And so we had some discussions about what that would look like and decided to move forward with it, which was like crazy and wild. And then even after we started, trying, I mean, it was kind of a big logistical deal, right? Because like they were like 2.5 hours away from us. So like, I'm trying to like time ovulation and like, taking time off from work and, driving to a different town to try to get pregnant. And it still ended up taking like an extra year past when we started trying with them. So it was like,
Oh, okay.
so I think we did a total of 13 cycles before we got pregnant.
Oh, wow.
Which, was a lot.
Is that usual for like donor sperm?
It shouldn't really make any difference if you're working with, like if you're doing the DIY, trying with fresh sperm. I will say the research around donor conception and donor sperm is not very good. But overall, it really shouldn't make any difference. It does seem to make a pretty significant difference if you're using frozen sperm because it's just not viable for very long.
Yeah.
So people using frozen sperm have to really get their timing exactly right. Because it just,
That's true.
you have more like depending on the research study, like a 6 to 12 hour window where the sperm is viable versus like the 3 days that fresh sperm is good for. So,
Yeah.
but I think like, even though it was extremely hard having all those unsuccessful attempts, it also had like a silver lining of we had this extra year to really get to know them better. Like we would come down and like there was one visit where I like took their kids and, babysat their kids so they could go out and, go on a date night and, so
Yeah.
I think that was a silver lining, but it was really hard in the process.
Mentally.
And we had like met with a fertility clinic, but like if you're using a known donor, there's a lot of additional expenses if you want to go through a fertility clinic. Like it adds an extra like $5,000 to $10,000 to the process.
Wow.
So like if we thought about doing IVF, but it was like IVF was like I think our quote for one round, like one retrieval cycle and one transfer was like $38,000.
Not covered by insurance.
Not covered by insurance. And, and in my age range, like the success rate for one cycle of IVF is like 30%.
Oh, gosh.
So it also, that didn't feel like a real viable path for us.
Yeah.
So, and then one cycle, it just worked.
Stuck. Yeah. The baby stuck. So you originally went the frozen donor route because you lived outside of California. And then when you moved to California, you went the known donor route. It took 13 months once you found someone who you previously knew. So you had somewhat of a relationship with them. But then now you were able to build an even stronger relationship with them during this process. And then after 13 months, we have a baby.
Yes, we have a baby.
All right. So now let's get into, because that I'm sure during the process, were you also in the mindset of preparing for birth and childbirth and all of those things? Or were you mostly focused on conception?
I would say that I had been in the wanting to get pregnant stage long enough that I had read the like trying to get pregnant books, the pregnancy books, and then moved on to like the toddler books by the time I actually got pregnant. So I was actually going back and like rereading, like I reread Expecting Better and I reread the book by Rebecca Dacker, Babies Are Not Pizzas. They Are Born Not Delivered.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah, that was the book that really like solidified to me that I wanted to do a home birth. My brother and I were both born at home.
Oh, I love that.
But like I'm a Western medicine trained medical provider. I'm a physical therapist. I work in a hospital. And so initially I think I was kind of like, oh yeah, I'll just do a hospital birth was kind of where my mind was at. Um, and so I really appreciated Rebecca Dacker's story because, she was coming from kind of a similar like evidence-based practice background and then looking at like, there are elements like at least in a straightforward birth, like an easy, straightforward birth with no complications, there are elements of evidence-based care that are easier to get at home. In terms of like not having, like I really didn't want to be in a position where I was like in active labor and also having to like really heavily advocate for myself around like interventions that I didn't want.
Yeah.
I wanted the, evidence-based things like being able to move around, being able to eat and drink. I wanted that to be like standard care. And that's not really the case even in the Bay Area. So that was kind of what initially led me to thinking about doing a home birth.
And were you pregnant at the time that you kind of decided on the home birth, or was this like still on the journey?
I had definitely decided that I was going to do a home birth in advance.
Yeah.
And, I also my sister-in-law and my brother had a baby back in 2021. And, she had frustrations with sort of her experiences with the OBs and like, things like, oh, we're going to induce at 39 weeks. Like just, it didn't feel like a conversation. So she actually ended up switching and doing a home birth and had a very positive home birth experience. So
I love that. And I love that you were born at home and then you had a baby at home. Spoiler alert, she had a home birth. So it's like second generation home birth, which is so adorable and I love. But okay, so let's get back into, so now you're pregnant and you're preparing for your home birth. So did you like already know the like midwife or the provider that you wanted to support, or this is when the interviews began?
So my one of my friends actually used to be a home birth midwife in the Bay Area, and she had moved away, but she gave me kind of her short list of which midwives she would recommend that I interview. So I interviewed 3 different midwives. That's one thing I really love about the home birth midwife process, at least in places like the Bay Area where there are a lot of home birth midwives.
Yeah, there's so many.
Is it means that you get to interview people and ask them like about their how they operate and like what point in labor do they want to show up? Like how much birth support do they want to give? Do they want you to hire a doula independently or or are they comfortable working with first-time parents without a doula? Like, there was a lot of questions and we ended up hiring this midwife named Anjali, who's originally from Florida. She was lovely. And I mean, I just like the whole midwife care was just really lovely. Like I had a really, I would say pretty straightforward pregnancy. Like I didn't have a lot of symptoms. I didn't have morning sickness. I was still exercising, and riding my bike to work. And so like we would go into these midwife appointments that were, an hour long with basically no concerns. But it just gave us a lot of time to like get to know each other. And I think that really built this foundation of when we went into the actual birth, we felt really safe with her, which really makes a difference.
Let's take a break from this episode to hear about our sponsor, Needed. Needed is a nutrition company focused on the perinatal timeframe that both Gina and I have utilized during our pregnancies, postpartums, and still to this day. And one of their products that I've been using during my pregnancy currently, as well as my postpartum, and just kind of since 2021 is their vitamin D. And this is because their prenatal vitamin already has 4,000 units of vitamin D, which is what is recommended, but I need to add on additional vitamin D usually because I am deficient in vitamin D. So I use their add-on option, which I love that they have, to add on an additional 2,000 units to my vitamin D supplementation. Vitamin D is an important vitamin because it can help with so many things, such as our ability to absorb calcium. So like our bone health, our teeth health. It can also help with your hair and your nail growth, as well as so many other things, potentially even like your pain threshold during labor. If you're vitamin D deficient, could be worse. So I've noticed by taking a supplement of vitamin D, my fatigue is also better for me personally, and it can just make me feel overall better when my vitamin D is at 9 and it's in the more optimal range of 50 to 60. And one of the things that I really like about Needed is they also have a vitamin D testing kit, because we do want to supplement based on what our vitamin D actually is versus kind of symptom based. So if we can test our vitamin D and know how much we should actually supplement, that can make the supplementation just a little bit better. So you can do an at-home test where you just prick your finger, collect a little blood, and then send it off. And then they'll be able to test and tell you what your levels are, and also see if the levels are improving over time with the vitamin D supplementation. So if you want to check out Needed for any of their products and even their vitamin D supplementation or their testing kit, head to thisisneeded.com and use code MamastePod to get 20% off your first order. So did you had nothing kind of come up during your pregnancy of like aches or pains or like any symptoms? It was pretty like just straightforward.
You know, the funny one that I wasn't prepared for was, I know everybody talks about having to pee all the time, like especially at night. And I was like, okay, that's like a space issue. That makes sense. But what I didn't realize is that a lot of it is hormonally driven. So that hit me at like 8 weeks. So I pretty much had to get up every night at least once from 8 weeks all the way up until when I had him.
Yeah. That's like one of the things that people don't expect as well, like very commonly. They're like, I feel like I have a UTI or something because I'm peeing like all the time. And I was like, well, one, until baby is 12 weeks, like your bladder and your uterus are fighting for space within your pelvis. So first trimester, it is still a space issue. But it's also your blood volume is doubling. So now your kidneys have to like work harder, and the hormones are causing your kidneys to work harder to create more pee, which is just filling your bladder up more. And it's quite rude, honestly, because you're already like, it's already harder to move in the later portion of pregnancy. And now you're just creating more pee more often. And it's just rude. So that was the only kind of pregnancy symptom you really had?
I had like some very mild food aversions early on, like kind of in the evening. Like there was like a few weeks where some of the food was just really unappealing, but I really didn't have significant like early pregnancy symptoms. It didn't start getting like a little bit exciting until I got into like past 30 weeks, I would say. I started getting Braxton Hicks at like 28 weeks or 29 weeks. And they were kind of like, oh, this is kind of like a little exciting, right? Like this is a sign like, something's, there's like a real baby in there. Yeah, I felt, and then around 32 weeks, I started getting a lot of Braxton Hicks, like all the time. And it was actually significant enough that by the time I hit 34 weeks, we were like, oh, I wonder like what, the labor timing apps. We pulled out our labor timing app and, just out of curiosity. And the app was like, you should go to the hospital. You are in labor.
They say that for literally like you're in labor for 30 minutes. Oh, your contractions are so close. You should consider.
So I was basically at that point, I was having what, to me, again, still felt like non-productive contractions. Like I didn't really think I was in labor. Like it really did feel like Braxton Hicks, but they were like, every 4 to 5 minutes, lasting all day, every day. And it pretty much just continued like that.
Mm-hmm. Were they painful or just like sudden tightening, sudden releasing?
So mostly they were not painful. I would have some runs of ones that were painful, but mostly it was just the belly tightens, and then it would hold for 30, 40 seconds and then it would relax. And the other thing that we had that was going on at the same time was that he was really quite active. He was a very active baby, and he kind of so he was alternating between being like transverse with his head off to one side or being head down. And he ended up doing that all the way through to like partway through week 40.
Oh, no.
So, we'd get all excited. We'd be like, woohoo, he's head down. And he'd be head down for like a couple days, maybe. And then, the next time we went to look, he'd be like sideways again. I'd be like, oh no. Um, so I don't have any, I couldn't find any studies on this, but I kind of have a suspicion that the really excessive prodromal labor and the really active baby had something to do with each other.
Yeah. I don't know if there's research, but I believe it.
I honestly, on both of these things, like like a first baby that was moving around that late and the prodromal labor, there really just isn't really much research. The only thing that I felt really solid on was that there didn't really seem to be anything I could do about it besides just continue life as normal. So, I was still, I bike commuted up to 36 weeks, and I played a walking game of ultimate frisbee at 39 weeks.
I love that for you.
I pretty much stopped running at like 32 weeks, not because I couldn't run, but because I would get a lot of round ligament pain after running. That was like pretty debilitating the next day. So,
Yeah.
but really honestly, I was pretty comfortable pregnant. The only thing I had at the very end is that there was a point where he would be in some weird position where he was pushing on one of my ribs.
Oh.
And then that was causing a lot of back pain. So towards the end, I had kind of intermittent where one day I would have a whole bunch of back pain, and then he would change position and I would have no back pain.
So it seems like all of your issues are not issues, but discomforts were surrounding potentially his position in your body.
Yeah,
which
totally.
We love. We love that for you. Okay, so pregnancy, pretty straightforward. It sounds like, minus the super long prodromal labor of your entire third trimester. So let's get into birth.
So one of the sort of stress points when you're planning a home birth is that there's a window that you have to be in to do a home birth in the state of California. So you have to make it to 37 weeks, which early on there was a point where we were a little nervous about that, right?
Yeah.
My midwife almost sent me to the hospital one night, around 34 weeks, just because of how, consistent the contractions were. And I sort of was like, do you feel comfortable with waiting a couple hours? Can we wait a couple hours and just see if this feels like it's progressing? Because I had really quite bad insurance. So it would have been quite expensive for me to go to the ER. And she felt okay waiting. And after a couple hours, we decided I didn't need to go in. So I never went in to get checked. But so you have to make it to 37 weeks, and then you can't go past 42 weeks. So you have this basically 5-week window that, most people will hit, but some people won't. So I got to, and I, honestly, even I would say by the time I got to 38 weeks and was pretty solid that the prodromal labor wasn't real labor and it was just going to kind of keep poking along, I was pretty sure I was going to go to past 40. Statistically, that's likely, 40 plus 5 is average for a first birth. So I was really mentally prepared to go past 40. And I was like, okay, I'm going to consider 41, really more like my due date, just, as a mental trick to make me, not get too antsy. And so I got in, it was 40 weeks and he was still flipping at the beginning of week 40. And then partway through week 40, he kind of settled down. It was more head down. And then we got to 41 weeks. And then it was and at that point we were doing, twice weekly midwife visits. I did do the non-stress test, where they make sure that his heart rate he's having enough little bits of acceleration. And also they checked my amniotic fluid levels, which were fine. And then we started talking about what's our backup plan, if I don't go into labor by 42 weeks. So we actually had talked to the local hospital and figured out what that would look like. And we actually had an induction scheduled for 42 weeks. So, I'm little past 41 weeks, I'm okay, we really need to get this baby moving. I had read all the research on natural induction methods, and my overall conclusion was that none of it started labor, but that it was like potentially beneficial for labor once you go into it. And I will say, like, having read all the research had no impact on what I was willing to do past 40 weeks.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So I was still eating the dates, and I was going for like really steep hikes with lots of stairs. At like 41 plus 1 or 41 plus 2, I did this hike that was just like straight down this like side of this canyon and back up. And, this pair of little old ladies went by me and were like, "Oh, you're so brave being out here hiking. When are you due?" And I'm like, "Last week." And they're like, "Oh, okay."
It makes sense now.
So I was really doing all the things. And one thing I haven't mentioned is, so his due date was originally the end of September. So it was September 30th. And my birthday is October 12th. And so when I was first calculating out like the window that he could be born in, I was like, oh, he could technically show up on my birthday. And then I was like,
hopefully not.
But I was like, but I don't actually want to be pregnant that long. So let's just not do that. But then it was, it was getting closer and closer. We were like just a couple days out from my birthday. So I was like, well, at this point, I may as well just, have him on my birthday, not that you have any control over that. So like my partner was like trying to figure out, what he was going to do for my birthday, because we just assumed we'd be taking care of a newborn. So we hadn't planned anything.
Yeah.
And, like the last couple of days before I went into labor, I was definitely starting to have some like slightly more serious prodromal labor. So I was having runs that were like more painful, and, felt like maybe a little more progressive, and they would go on for like an hour or two and then they would go away. So I was like, okay, it feels like something's going to happen. And then on my birthday, the morning of my birthday at 1:00 in the morning, I got up to use the bathroom and I had like the classic pop and my water broke at 1:00. So I went back to bed to tell my partner, obviously we're just like super excited. Like, labor's happening.
Yeah.
We're like 3 days away from that induction. And, we're real excited that things are maybe moving. I was group strep B positive. So we needed to call her because I was going to do antibiotics at home. And you want to do that like 4 or 5 hours after your water breaks. So I called my midwife and told her that my water had broken. And like originally I was really thinking, I'd watched all these like home birth vlogs, and they were all this like long, peaceful early labors with people like baking sourdough bread. And
yes, they're always baking. They're always baking.
And they're like hanging out with their toddlers and like going for walks and like swaying peacefully in the backyard. And I was like, oh, so I'm thinking, my midwife is going to come and she's going to, run the antibiotics, and then she's probably going to go home because there's no way I'm going to be in active labor in 4 hours, right? Because at this point, like I was still just having my normal prodromal labor. I wasn't having like, the contractions weren't stronger than the prodromal. So I was like, oh, this just feels like normal. I wasn't even real sure that I was like in labor or if I just had my water break prematurely. But, so I called her at 1, and the plan was she was going to come at 5 and do antibiotics. And I'm still thinking she's going to show up and she's going to, go home after doing the antibiotics. And so she's like, drink some fluids. I had some broth. We had got pho broth as a, high sodium, good thing to have before birth.
Yeah.
So we had pho broth, and then we were going to go back to sleep. And of course we were like way too excited to go back to sleep. There was no sleeping happening.
Yeah. Checks out.
And then at like 3, the contractions started to pick up like around 1:30. That was, I think, when I was pretty sure that I was really in labor, I didn't just have my water break. And by 3:30, I was like, okay, this is like, this whole going back to sleep thing is not happening. Like the contractions were starting to get stronger. So we decided to get up and do like any last minute prep that we needed. We were planning to have the baby in our spare bedroom So we already had like the birth tub was set up in the spare bedroom, so we didn't have to like run around last minute. I know a couple people that had birth pools that never made it out of their box because of like fast labors. So
Yeah.
we were pretty much set up. So we moved into the room that we were going to have the baby in, and at that point, I would say like I was coping with the contractions like really well. Like it felt relatively easy. I wasn't really doing any coping strategies besides breathing. I was changing position around. And then like right before Anjali got there, it started to kind of really ramp up. So this was like, my water broke at 1, and then by like, I would say like 4:30, things started to feel pretty intense. And I started being like, I think we're going to need the tub earlier. And, we had been like, oh yeah, we're going to use the tub like later in active labor. And like, because we didn't want to like stall or like, make everything like slow down. But I was still like, oh, this is early labor. That's too early. And by the time my midwife got there around like 5 or 5:30, I was like literally crawling around on the floor throwing up. Like, and
In active labor.
yeah, and but I'm still thinking it's early labor because I'm like, I'm not, I'm trying to play the mental game of like not getting myself into thinking that this is like far in. So I'm still thinking she's gonna like do antibiotics and go home. And, as I'm like throwing up every contraction, like literally every contraction. So like it took us probably 45 minutes to do the antibiotics because I was like running to the bathroom. Of course, I had diarrhea and was running to the bathroom, and then I was throwing up during the contractions. And it's really hard to run an IV during that. So we finally got the antibiotics on board. And at that point, I was like, I need to get into the tub. I know this is like, too soon, but I need to get into the tub. So she's like, okay, let's fill up the tub. So we filled up the tub, and I got in, and the water definitely helped. It was just, it kind of like, it took it down just like a little bit. But it's still like, my brain was just like, this is early labor. This is really hard. Like, I don't, like I won't say I ever got to a point where I was like, no, I can't do this. But I was like, this is definitely a little harder than I was expecting, like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily say it was like, it wasn't exactly painful. It was just like really intense, like just like lots of like intense body sensation. And like in my birth class, they had talked about how you would have these like breaks in between contractions. I really didn't have very significant breaks in between contractions. Like occasionally I would have like enough time to kind of like emerge out of birth, but for the most part I was just like totally inward focused.
Yeah.
And like I would say the end of what in retrospect I was like, okay, that was transition, right? The end of transition was definitely the hardest part. Like,
Yes.
I didn't have, we had taken like a really long birth class and learned all of these coping strategies. And when it really got into it, it was just like too intense to use most of them. So the only thing I actually really liked during the like really intense part was like cold cloths. Apparently I didn't know this till later, but they were like running ice from my brother and sister-in-law who live upstairs and like, doing like ice cold cloths on my neck. And that was the thing, that and a fan were basically the only things I really wanted. Everything else annoyed me. We tried a couple other things and I was just like, no, this is annoying. I don't like this. But the combination of the water, there was just the supported position of really being able to kind of like relax in the water, I think was what really helped. And then right around 7:30, so this is like, 6.5 hours, I guess, after my water broke, I've had my first little like involuntary push, like at the end of a contraction, where it was like, not me, it was my body. My body was pushing. And I was like, oh no, it's much too early for that. Like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
And I was like, oh no, there's no way I'm ready to push. But then I heard my midwife out in the hallway calling the second midwife to come, because they call a second midwife once you get into the pushing phase. Because, essentially, like, after the birth, you have two patients. You have mom and you have baby.
Yeah.
So in California, that's just standard practice. Um, so our second midwife, Jennifer, was on her way. So that was the point when I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is like time to push. And I would say like the pushing was a little scary at first, like, because the reflexive pushing was so strong. Like I was expecting it to be more like it was like telling me to push and I was pushing, but it was like my body was pushing and I had like some ability to kind of direct it.
Yeah.
But it certainly wasn't like controllable. Like it just makes me crack up because I've read in multiple other people's birth stories that like somebody told them not to push at some point, like, to like wait 30 minutes for the doctor to, get out of
Yeah.
traffic or
No,
something
that's
like
not
that.
possible.
I was like, no, there was no way. So I think I ended up pushing for like maybe 45 minutes in the tub. And then around 45 minutes in, my midwife asked me to try a different position. So she had me get out, and it's really hard to walk at that point because it's just like so much pressure.
Yes.
And they had me switch, and I labored in the bathroom for a little while. I didn't actually love that position. I know everybody swears by sitting on the toilet, and it just was kind of uncomfortable.
It's a lot of pressure also when your baby is that low.
Yeah. But that was the point where she like, there was one point where she almost did a cervical check. Like I hadn't done any checks at this point. And then there was one point where she was like wanting to maybe do one, and I said that was fine. But then like the next contraction, she could just tell from how everything looked that he was in the right position. So I ultimately went through the whole labor with no checks. And after laboring on the toilet for like, I don't know, maybe like another 20 minutes, she wanted to try side lying. And I think somewhere in here, I think it was maybe once I switched to the bed and side lying, somewhere in there, he started having not like big decels, but like his heart rate was like dropping just a little bit. So, he was going down to like 110. And so it wasn't like they were super stressed out, but that was the point where I kind of got the message that like, okay, we need to kind of like move this along. So that's the point when she started having me really vary my position more. So I pushed in side lying for a bit, and then that didn't really fix his heart rate. So she had me switch to the other side, which also didn't change it. So then we switched, and she had me do like a runner's lunge on the bed with the yoga ball in front. And I think that's what got him like the last little bit of the way. And I kind of like, they weren't stressing me out. It wasn't like I had, 20 people in the room and there was like the fetal heart rate monitor. But I'd gotten the message that like we needed to move things along. So I was doing like more pushes per contraction and kind of like really focusing on it at that point. And, I'd done the runner stretch, and then I came back into all fours because I was going to go back into side lying. But as soon as I got onto all fours, I was like, oh no, he's going to be born. Like this is,
This is it.
this is it. And Anjali told my partner, Richard, to get ready to catch the baby because he was going to catch him.
Oh, yay.
And at that point, I think he was definitely crowning. Like they were like, oh, there's hair. And, they asked if I wanted to look with a mirror, but then we couldn't find one, of course.
Oh, yeah. In the moment.
And so Anjali was like, okay, Richard, get ready to catch him. So Richard like had his hands out. And one thing we didn't totally realize is that only a very small portion of my waters had actually broke. So right before his head came out, it just was like flooded the bed, totally flooded the bed.
Oh, no. Did you have pads down?
We did.
Oh, okay.
We had a waterproof mattress cover under the sheet. So that happened. And then Riley came out, and I think he was born in 2 pushes. So like partway to his head and then the second. And Richard caught him, and initially like they were kind of a little like I wouldn't, they were like a little concerned about him initially because he just was really quiet. He wasn't a crier. So they were like rubbing his back and they passed him up to me and I was holding him on my chest and they were like kind of trying to stimulate him, but he was just looking at me like he had his head up and his eyes were open and he was like moving his head around. I was like, he really looks okay. Like, there's nothing about this baby that makes me particularly worried. And at that point, they kind of backed up a step and were like, oh no, his vital signs are fine. Like, he's just not crying, but the rest of it was totally fine. So, the one nice thing, one thing I really appreciated about the midwife model was we got like, Richard and Riley basically just like hung out in the bed for an hour and, we just snuggled him. And I think somewhere in there I nursed him a little bit. And they didn't do the newborn, like the full newborn exam and like the vitamin K shot. They did like maybe an hour after the birth. And that was also when around then they also helped me get up and get into the bathroom to pee and to take a shower, which was amazing. And impressively enough, even despite the like total flooded bed, we had like thrown a bunch of towels down, but I mean, it was pretty much a disaster. We took the top sheet off, took the mattress protector off, and the sheet underneath was totally dry. It was fine.
Those mattress protectors, they're magic.
So, yeah. So then Riley was born. He ultimately was born at like 9:40 on my birthday.
So you have a birthday twin.
Well, and this is the surprise twist. So the part I forgot to mention earlier is I was actually born on my mom's birthday. So he's the third generation.
Oh, I love it. Our dad's birthday is October 12th too. So we love the continuity. But I love that. So you were born at home on your mom's birthday and then you had a baby at home on your birthday.
That's correct.
Which, I love that. So now he has to have a baby at home on his birthday.
Clearly.
Just continue the tradition.
We won't hold him to it.
So all in all, it sounds like your birth, like while it was probably quicker than you were expecting, took a little bit longer, but very, very average.
It was like 2 hours. And I will say, like, once I got through the transition, like the pushing was like, it was intense, but it was like empowering. It was like, it was like, like you do like, like people run marathons and climb mountains and like, it was like badass and, it was like hard, but in a really like rewarding way. Like it didn't, it didn't feel scary. I felt supported and safe. And it was just this like really hard thing that I was going to like power through and get this like really cool baby at the end.
Yeah.
So like the whole experience was really like the birth experience was really good.
Good. And I mean, that's a very common thing for people who like the pushing portion feels better. Because they're like, it's like I can actually like do something with the contractions rather than just like live in them. Like it gave you something to do to like almost distract yourself, but also it's like you feel so badass as you're like pushing this baby out of your body. So I love that you also describe it that way, because when I tell people, they're like, okay, sounds great. And I'm like, no, I swear it's the truth. And they always stare at me in childbirth education. And I'm like, I promise people say this. So thank you for supporting us with that comment.
Yeah, well, I think I was able to really like embrace that because I felt really safe and supported.
Yeah.
And like, I think if I had been in a position where I was having to like do a lot of advocating for myself, like saying things like, hey, I don't want to be hooked up to those IV fluids right now, or, like, I think that would have made it much harder. Like having like the whole team be kind of on the same page about what the birth plan was really made it easy because I didn't ever have to advocate for anything the whole.
Yeah. You had this trust.
Yeah. I just had to be like, no, I don't like this comfort measure that we tried. Let's do something else. But I didn't have to be like advocating for like big medical decisions because like I was not in a fit position to be
No,
trying
no
to
one
do
is
that.
in that state in labor to like advocate, which is like why a doula is great because they can like help you advocate for the things so that you don't have to do it in that very vulnerable state.
Oh
But when
yeah,
you have a
100%.
provider that is trusting of what you're wanting and that you trust is keeping your birth and your safety in mind, it's really nice to not have to worry about any of that. And I love that you got that.
If I had done a hospital birth, I 100% would have had a doula.
Oh, yeah.
And, honestly, I might have had a doula anyways. It's just like the cost of private paying for a midwife plus private paying for a doula would have
And in
been kind of crazy.
California,
And the way that it works is if you do get transferred with your out of your home birth, like if you get transferred to the hospital, my midwife would have gone with me and basically acted like a doula.
is it
So I still wouldn't have ended up in the hospital unsupported.
alone? Well, that's great. And that's what, so like my home birth midwife says, she's like, you are hiring me for a home birth, but you are basically hiring me as a midwife. Like, I will be your midwife. I don't have privileges wherever you get transferred, but like, you can't get rid of me unless you fire me. So, like, I'm coming with you to the hospital. And I was like, great. I love that. And you can't get rid of me either. You can't fire me. It's not allowed. So I love that you're a midwife because not all home birth midwives do offer that, like where they will go to the hospital with you. So I love that they did. How was postpartum?
The postpartum, I think, everything up to that point had been easier than I was expecting. And the postpartum was definitely substantially harder than I was expecting. I like overall just like looked kind of okay initially. Like I had one little like first degree tear, no stitches. I wasn't in a ton of pain. I never took anything for pain. But I was just like kind of unwell, I would say initially. Like I had a period of a couple weeks where essentially like if I stood up, like my heart rate would go up to like 140, 150. Um, and then and I was just like really fatigued. Like I really couldn't do much of anything for the first like 4 to 6 weeks. And like coming into it, like, I came into it really athletic,
Yeah.
and so that was like definitely not what I was expecting. Like I would say like around like week 2, I think I was like walking like a half a block, kind of, like very tentatively. And like by week 4, I was doing like some very slow, like around the block walks. But I felt really unwell. Like I just
Yeah.
didn't feel good. And then the other part was we had a lot of trouble with breastfeeding initially. So my little guy, Riley, he was like really hungry baby. Like he wanted to gain weight really fast. But he also wasn't very efficient. So we had a lot of trouble with like just getting him enough milk initially without, so I ended up with some nipple damage because his latch wasn't super good. And then there was a period where we were doing like the dread triple feeding of,
Oh,
breastfeeding and then
no.
pumping and then feeding pump milk. And, like I don't know how I would have made it through early postpartum without the amount of support that I had. Because like, my partner was like taking care of me, taking care of the baby, like pretty much 24/7. And then my brother and sister-in-law who we live with, were doing like all the cooking and like taking the baby for like a period so we could nap and like,
Yeah.
but it was pretty hard. And then like week
Yeah.
2, I got mastitis. So
No.
I got bacterial mastitis. And so, I'm at home with my terrible insurance, and I'm lying in bed with a heart rate of 120. Looking at like my hospital sepsis criteria being like, well, I technically meet sepsis criteria. Like, I had a temperature of like 104.
Oh,
I
gosh.
felt awful. So we did get a prescription for antibiotics and they kicked in like right before my partner was going to basically just like strong arm me into going to the hospital.
Oh, no.
So that was hard. I think the reason I got mastitis was just because of how inefficient his latch was.
Yeah.
I think and we were I think the first pump we were using wasn't working very well. So we switched pumps, and I think we got better milk removal after that.
And the nipple damage, so like bacteria could actually get in there from the nipple damage with the poor latch. So yeah, all the perfect storm.
So that was really hard. And then like around like week 6, things just started feeling like a little funky. And I was like, I bet I have a prolapse. I feel like I have a prolapse. I bet I have a prolapse. I'm a PT, but I'm not a pelvic floor PT. So I went to a pelvic floor PT and I had a bladder prolapse, a grade 2 bladder prolapse, and a urethral prolapse, which are less common. And so that was like a whole nother thing that took a really long time. Like I would say I'm still not 100%. I'm 8 months out. But like, I would say it took until like maybe 5 months postpartum before I felt like I could really like walk unlimited distances. Like before that, I would like think about like where I was going to park, like, cause like walking 2 blocks versus walking 1 block felt significant. And then it was like around 6 weeks or 6 months was when I went back to doing some running. So I'm back playing ultimate frisbee, although I would say a little bit slower at this point.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say I'm 100%, but I feel like I'm on a trajectory where I feel like, maybe by a year out, I'll feel pretty normal. So,
yeah. Did you get a pessary or anything, or just like pelvic floor PT?
So the pessary was honestly the like game changer for me. I did pelvic floor PT, although honestly, like, I was doing the MamasteFit postpartum program, like the mini program. There was no way I could do like 45 to 65 minutes.
You were not doing 45.
But I was doing the mini program. Like I remember the first day that I did it, I think I was like 6 weeks postpartum. And the first day I did it, it was like 3 exercises and like, none of them were very hard. And like my legs were like shaking afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like when I went to the pelvic floor PT, like most of what they would have given me was already in the program.
Awesome. We
like
love
the
that.
exercises were very much in line with what the pelvic floor PT was recommending. So I kind of like poked along hoping the exercise would like get me all the way back, and it kind of wasn't. So right around, I guess it was like around 5 months, I did a ring pessary, and that was a huge improvement. So that basically took me from like having like occasional like big like stress incontinence, like with like coughing, to like that completely got rid of it. And I was able, at that point, it was like my physiology didn't look that bad. Basically, like the PT was like, this doesn't look that bad, but I was still like really couldn't run, and was having trouble with like longer walks. And with the ring pessary, I was able to go back to playing ultimate. So my guess is I'll probably use that at least a few more months, and then maybe start kind of phasing off of it like around a year is my guess.
Yeah, which is like the pessary is such a great tool for that exact reason, where like you're doing the rehab, but it's like you can't almost progress past a certain point because your symptoms, which that was with, I had my first baby, I also had prolapse, and I was also at 6 weeks like, oh no, something's wrong. And also ran to a pelvic floor PT. And I think we did the exercises for like 6 months and like just nothing was happening. So we finally got a pessary, and it was like a game changer where like I could go to work and not feel like my like organs were falling out of my body for a 12-hour shift, which was so amazing. So I love them as a tool.
Yeah, that was something one thing I didn't really realize before, obviously, I'm a PT, so I did a whole bunch of research, and I'm not like a pelvic floor PT. But one thing I really didn't realize was how much of the like postpartum problems are more hormonally driven. So I was like, oh, this is all like birth trauma and it's just going to like heal and get better. But, I'm continuing to breastfeed. So my estrogen levels are going to continue to be low.
Yes.
And that, is going to cause, ongoing problems with pelvic floor because you get that vaginal wall atrophy.
Which I think a study just came out about it that actually like supports this like fully, not just like people's like hypotheses. Like there's like actual scientific data that now supports like, yes, your vagina is thinner postpartum.
Mm-hmm. It certainly felt like that.
Yeah.
My pelvic floor PT says she typically sees a pretty big improvement, like once people stop breastfeeding and once your period comes back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sort of like,
I know you're like, please.
I know. I'm like, do I want my period back? No, I don't really want my period back.
I know. It's such a double-edged sword. Yeah, I feel that. But I think like, thank you so much for sharing your full story. Cause like the conception portion, the birth portion, obviously like home birth is not like super common. Like it's more common now, but it's not super common having a home birth and then like a quicker home birth. And then your postpartum journey was like not what many people are expecting. Like no one prepares for postpartum, even though like we all tell them to. You always go into it, especially healthcare providers. We're like, oh, that's like fine. We'll be fine. Like I don't need to do anything. And then it like hits you like a Mack truck. And especially if you have a different postpartum recovery than like just like the normal transition with mastitis. So you had an infection, which affected your energy levels. And then you had prolapse, which affected your like long-term recovery. So like all of these things, but because you had such a good support system, like I think that also probably played a part in your recovery being still positive. Even though it's longer than.
Yeah, it was definitely a harder recovery. We were already like pretty solid on that we were only having one baby, but like if we hadn't been, I feel like that postpartum recovery would have made me kind of question. I'm sure in a year or two that would have faded a little bit, but we were already, we're really involved in my nephew's life who lives upstairs. He's like he's about to turn 4. So we kind of already have 2 kids in the house. Plus like, I'm 38 and it was already hard to get pregnant when we did get pregnant. And, I don't really want to be trying this all again in a couple years.
Yeah. Which is totally fine. And you can always change your mind. And that's like the one nice thing. So you can always change your mind. But
it's a little more complicated when you have no sperm.
Yeah, but I mean, there's always a point that you can be like, okay, maybe we want to try this journey again, but it's also okay not to.
No, I think he's our one and only, and we're very delighted with him.
He sounds amazing. So thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and sharing your full story with us, with your conception, your pregnancy, birth, and your postpartum journey. And thank you for trying our postpartum program and giving us a rave review in this podcast. Are there any last minute, like little nuggets of advice that you would leave with our followers before we say goodbye?
I think just be ready to expect the unexpected. I mean, I felt like all of pregnancy was sort of, it was all different than I was expecting. Like the parts that I was expecting to be really hard were, some of them were easy. And parts that I was expecting to not be too bad were hard. So I think just kind of going into pregnancy with sort of an open mind. And I don't know, I felt like I had a lot of trust in my body, trust in my partner, trust in my care team. And I feel like that made a huge difference in how I kind of look back and view my experience of pregnancy and delivery.
Perfect.
And also like having a baby is pretty badass. Like that you could actually like grow a whole person. Like that's so cool.
Yeah, it is. It is a feat just by itself. Growing a human and an organ. You grew a baby and a placenta. And then birthed them both. So it is an amazing feat, regardless of how you do it. But thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and supporting us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode where Faith shared her journey into motherhood with her conception journey, her birth, as well as her postpartum. One of the things that Faith really shared about in her story was that she felt supported and felt safe with her provider, where she wouldn't have had to advocate for herself in the middle of labor, which could have potentially disrupted her birthing process. She was able to completely surrender and know that her provider had her best interest at heart. She had a great support system in her postpartum, which really emphasized, even though she had some struggles with mastitis and breastfeeding issues, as well as a prolapse diagnosis, she was fully supported by her family and her extended family to be able to navigate that journey easily. And if you're looking for more support during your pregnancies and postpartums, check out our childbirth education courses, where we break down the science of labor and birth so that you know what's happening during labor and how to navigate it with labor comfort techniques, birth options, and what you can do to ensure that you have a provider who is going to support you, as well as our postpartum education course to kind of help you prepare for that postpartum. Postpartum for many of us is harder than birth, and because we don't really prepare for it. So if we can know what to expect, so we're not having to Google at 2 a.m. of what to expect, it can make that navigation easier. You can also check out any of our online fitness courses for our prenatal and a postpartum to help you prepare for birth and recover after having a baby, all at MamasteFit.com. And as a thank you for listening to this entire episode, you can use code STORY10 to get 10% off, as well as an additional 10% off our bundles, which are already 15% off. And this podcast is sponsored by Needed. Needed is a nutrition company focused on the perinatal time frame that both Gina and I have utilized and love very, very dearly. And if you want to check them out, head to thisisneeded.com and use code MamastePod to get 20% off your first order.